I will admit that my experience with EVs or electric vehicles is rather limited. See, the first time I drove one was way back in 2017 with the Nissan Leaf, and that was in Japan. And the second time was back here in the Philippines with the Kia EV6 and guest starring Chini. However, I haven't actually taken one home with me and sort of do errands with it and whatnot. So to break that cherry, we have this, the BMW iX3. And this is going to be a sort of video of two kinds. One, my experience really living with it, and two, how is the iX3 really like as a car? So I picked up the iX3 a couple of days back, and I've taken it around the city, driven it around the province, and I've also basically been stuck in really bad traffic and also out on the highway. Now, if you're curious about its battery consumption, well, it is at 5.1 kilometers per kilowatt hour. Truth be told, I have no idea if that is good or not. 5.1 kilometers per kilowatt hour, according to a friend of ours, is actually pretty good. It's not too heavy on battery, it's not too heavy on charge, and you're gonna need that because this car has a battery capacity of about, give or take, 78 kilowatt hours, but I could be wrong. Of course, we could refer to the little ticker down there. So you got that battery capacity, and at the same time it actually produces 320 horsepower and 400 newton meters of torque. So you get that slug of torque from a diesel engine, at the same time you get the horsepower from a petrol engine. So would you call it the best of both worlds? Well, I'd say it's not bad at all. But to drive, well, I actually had the diesel X3 prior to this one, and in terms of refinement, this is just leaps and bounds ahead of that diesel engine. Now, BMW diesel engines aren't exactly renowned for refinement. This one, well, again, it is a battery-powered car, so you're not really gonna have any issues with sound or refinement or noise. And that's the thing about this car. If you want a silent and comfortable driving experience, the only way to go really is EV. But what about the ride? Okay, so it's a bit firmer than your standard diesel-powered X3 for two reasons. One, this is an M Sport model, so it's got bigger alloys, it's got sportier suspension, etc, etc. And two, battery packs are heavy. And that is why they had to beef up the suspension of this one, and in return it is a firmer ride. Now that doesn't mean that you're riding on coilovers or you're riding like it doesn't have any suspension. It is still supple, it is still comfortable, but if you're coming from the diesel, you will notice. But perhaps the happy consequence of having those battery packs is surprisingly better handling. Now let me explain. Now, BMW doesn't put the battery packs at the front. Like most EVs, they put the battery packs, well, where I'm seated right now, under the floor. And because they lower the center of gravity, that also means better handling. It also helps that it's on grippy Advan tires, although they don't really do much favors for its range. Whether you like it or not, electrification is here. Whether it is with a hybrid, whether mild, or standard hybrid, or plug-in, or full electrification. One way or another, you're gonna have to come to terms with that. Admittedly, I do miss the sound of BMW straight six engines because that's what I grew up with. You know, a straight six and a BMW is always a perfect combination. You'll never go wrong with it. And now for the big question, which is range. Now, according to BMW, the iX3 can do up to 385 kilometers on a single charge. Now, when I got this car, it was at 80% charge. And I have done over 100 kilometers with it so far. Again, in mixed conditions, bad traffic, light traffic, standstill traffic, and the expressway. And right now I have 186 kilometers of charge left at about 50%. Now with the air conditioning off, it adds about 20 plus kilometers worth of range. It actually went up right now. It went up from 185 to 187. So I actually gained 2 kilometers of range, because that will all depend on your driving style. Well, pessimistic or overly optimistic. So take it with a grain of salt. And I would recommend, let's say you're at 25% charge. That's when you plug in. Don't try to stretch it, because given our charging infrastructure in this country, um, you're gonna have a lot of range anxiety after that when it's at about 20-25%. And speaking of charging, well, if you do purchase one of these cars, at least it does come with a wall box, so you can charge this car when you get home. So you're never gonna have to worry about looking for some place that offers charging, whether it's fast charging or trickle charging or etc. But all in all, when it comes to driving, you know what? As much as I hate to admit this, and I love the sound of six-cylinder engines, and I love the old school feel of BMWs, I am starting to appreciate this car. Should I hand over my car guy card already? Well, no, because as a car, it's really good, and I can't deny the car's talents. Judging a car based on its powertrain is a bit like judging a person based on their hairstyle, really. I mean, there are some bad hairstyles and bad haircuts, but that doesn't define the person as a whole. If I could sum up the BMW iX3's interior nicely, it would be familiar. You get the same digital instrument cluster, although it has different displays because this is an EV. You also get a sort of different iDrive layout, but again, it's almost similar to the diesel-powered X3. You do get this plate down here that says iX3 on it. You know, ergonomics are typical BMWs. You got the good old dial here for your headlight switches. You got your onboard computer switch right by the turn signal stalk. And just a word of note, in non-Japanese cars, the wiper controls are actually the other way around. It's not the fault of the X3, it's really just more of cars outside Japan thing. Now, what I like about the iX3 though is this. It's got buttons in here. And I'm happy that this model didn't have that whole put everything in the touchscreen for controls thing. It just makes it so much easier to deal around here. You don't have to keep looking at the screen when you're driving and you want to adjust something. Space inside here at the front, okay, it's good. It's not spectacular because this is still based on the standard model, standard X3. It is a compliance car, but I do like the layout. I do like the conventionality of it. Now, the iDrive itself is pretty easy to use, or if it's your first time driving a BMW, you can just stick to the touchscreen. So at least you have dual controls. Cabin materials, well, it is typical of BMW. Lots of soft touch here. This is a very soft armrest, by the way. And you also have this sort of unvarnished wood trim here. So of course the dashboard is soft touch, the door panels are soft touch. But here is something that you don't get in the standard X3. And it's up there. It is a full glass panoramic sunroof. So that is the front of the iX3 covered. Let's hop on over to the back. Like the front seats of the iX3, the rear accommodations are exactly the same as that of the X3. It's not exactly the most spacious crossover in its class. Now, I know I make it look like there's a lot because I'm not tall. So why is that? Well, again, I explained that this is a compliance car. It is a standard internal combustion engine car converted with battery power. So the space is limited by the fuel-fed version's chassis in itself, and that is why the iX3 still has a transmission tunnel, even though it actually doesn't need one. But in terms of, you know, hip room, elbow room, shoulder room, and in some degrees headroom, you still have about this much, although that's according to my height. As for other things about the interior, as you can see, my arm is resting on this armrest back here. You have a climate control panel down here, and yes, you do get rear AC vents. Oh, and if you've noticed the speaker grills, they're the same color as this trim right here. Now, it's not just because of aesthetics, and that's because the iX3 comes with a Harman Kardon sound system. So that's the back seats, and you know, this is a crossover, so we might as well check out the cargo area. Now here's a rather interesting thing about the iX3, particularly the cargo area. It is actually bigger than that of the Philippine spec X3 diesel. Now the X3 diesel has a huge lip down here because that's where the spare tire is. Now the iX3 does not have a spare tire. It does come with a tire repair kit, but you don't get a spare. It is flatter, it is wider, and you get extra pockets on each side. And right down here is where your charger is. As for the tailgate, well, to close it, it is of the power operated variety, although you can also swing your foot underneath. It's got a sensor down there, so you can either open or close it if you've got your hands full. Now the current generation X3 has been around since around late 2017 for the 2018 model year. And because the iX3 is quite literally a battery-powered X3, the exterior design is pretty much the same. BMW does want to show its green credentials on its sleeves, so the iX3 does get a couple of design details that separates it from the standard fuel-fed models from this battery-powered model. Oh, of course, the most obvious difference here is the different grille. Obviously, you see the blue highlights down here and sort of this plate where the grills used to be, or rather the slats used to be. Now this, they say, is sort of for the radar for the car, and if it's fitted with adaptive cruise controller, etc., that's where they sort of put all the sensors in. Another thing is the blue ring around the BMW logo on the hood, and more blue highlights right here by the corner. Now this is exactly the same M Sport kit that you would get in an M Sport X3 that's powered by fuel. Another thing worth pointing out is the color. Now this color, I'm not too sure if it's exclusive to the iX3, but I do rather like it because from what you see, it looks like black, but it is actually a very deep shade of dark blue. Moving on to the back, it looks again like the standard X3, but there are two key differences. One, it actually has a different tailgate spoiler, and it's actually optimized for aerodynamic efficiency, so you could get more kilometers out of each charge of this thing. The other is the obvious lack of exhaust pipes, because why would you need one in an electric vehicle? Right, so the iX3, what do we think? Well, there are a couple of things that the iX3 actually doesn't have, which brings me neatly to the pros and cons of this EV. Now the first one is it doesn't have all-wheel drive. Yes, standard X3s have all-wheel drive, but regardless of what variant of iX3 you look at, whether it's for the local market or abroad or etc., there's no all-wheel drive option for this crossover. Now the second would be, well, it doesn't actually have much in the way of active safety systems or advanced driver assist systems. I don't know about you guys, you're paying this much for a luxury crossover, for an electric crossover. Do you think it should have it, or do you reckon it's nice to have but you're not really going to use it? So it doesn't have adaptive cruise, although it does have like a distance monitor, so it tells you if the car in front is too close, although it's not necessarily gonna do the braking for you. It'll warn you that you're a little too close, but it's still up to you to do the stopping. The third disadvantage, or rather con, of the iX3 is the platform itself. This is an internal combustion engine car that was adapted to carry batteries. And because of that, there is always going to be compromise, which also explains why it can't have all-wheel drive and the space inside isn't exactly as big as you'd expect it to be. But as far as compromises go, well, we reckon this is a good one, and that brings us on to the positives of this. One, it feels like a very normal car to drive. There's no learning curve needed. There's no dizzying ergonomics. You don't have to bring out your owner's manual to figure stuff out. I mean, if you're coming from BMWs from the past, you're going to be able to figure this out pretty quickly. Well, it's pretty simple and straightforward to deal with, and especially the fact that it's got, onto the second pro, buttons inside. It is ergonomic as far as modern German, or rather European cars go, because not everything is shoved into the touchscreen. Another thing I did like about this one is the way it regenerates power. So, of course, you have regenerative braking through the brakes. When you're coasting, it harvests all that power back. So in terms of range anxiety, it doesn't give you massive freakouts or any of that. I mean, I will admit, when I did get this on the first day, I was a little worried that I only got it at 80% charge. The way it saves charge and regenerates charge, it's actually mighty impressive on this one. And last, of course, is the practicality. Yes, it's not going to be as spacious as a dedicated EV platform. It's not going to have a flat floor or any of that, but it is still a crossover. And the cargo area, well, it's surprisingly bigger than the diesel-fed model. So how much is this, you ask? It starts at 4,590,000 pesos, hardly what anyone would call abot kaya, but I think it's a good family crossover. And you know what? If somebody gave me the keys to the iX3, I wouldn't hesitate getting one. I wouldn't hesitate accepting that offer. And if I were to give it a score, you know what? I give it a 9 out of 10 because this car finally made me understand that, EVs don't actually deplete their batteries that quickly, and it got rid of my range anxiety. Yet, but as it is, you know what? It's a darn good car.